The border marker at waypoint Sigma 7 is a slab of tungsten carbide the size of a cathedral, and someone carved my name into it 31 years ago. Not my real name. The name the border gave me. The name the aliens use when they talk about what happened to the Vethari scout fleet in the Exclusion Corridor, back when I still believed the system I built was a wall instead of a mouth. I'm standing in front of it now, 63 years old, wearing a civilian jacket over a body that hasn't been civilian in 4 decades, reading the carved glyphs that some Torvani pilgrim etched below the original warning text. I don't read Torvani, but I've been told what it says. Here is the architect. Here is the door that does not open. Pray you are never invited inside. My name is Commander Lena Sarik, Union Border Authority. Retired the way a gun is retired. You take it out of service, but the barrel remembers every round. I came back because a Vethari named Shoal asked me to. 31 years of silence and then a single transmission on a frequency that shouldn't exist anymore, routed through a relay I personally decommissioned in 2197. 4 words, translated from a language that has no word for please. Architect. I remember now. 31 years ago, the Exclusion Corridor was the simplest idea in human territorial policy. A strip of dead space, 6 light-years wide, separating Union claim systems from the uncharted margins where 4 alien civilizations, the Vethari, the Torvani, the Skeld, and the Orith, conducted their own expansion. No stations, no colonies, no infrastructure, just a line on a chart and a standing directive. Nothing crosses the corridor. In either direction. It wasn't diplomacy. We hadn't earned diplomacy yet. Humanity had been a spacefaring species for barely 2 centuries, and we'd learned exactly one lesson from every first contact scenario the Torvani had shared with us during the provisional exchange. The species that survived were the ones that maintained distance until they understood the rules. The corridor was our rule, our single, non-negotiable condition for participation in the interstellar community. I didn't design the corridor itself. That was policy, and policy came from people who wore better suits than I did. What I designed was LIGHTHOUSE. LIGHTHOUSE was the enforcement architecture, a distributed sensor and response network threaded through the corridor like a nervous system. 14,000 autonomous monitoring platforms, each one a little larger than a shipping container, each one connected to the others through quantum-entangled relay chains that could propagate a detection signal across 6 light-years in under 9 seconds. If anything crossed the threshold, anything with a mass signature above natural debris, LIGHTHOUSE saw it, classified it, logged it, and escalated it. The escalation protocol had 4 tiers. Tier 1 was passive observation. Tier 2 was active scanning and a recorded warning broadcast in 11 languages. Tier 3 was signal jamming and navigational interference. We could make a ship's instruments lie to it, feed it phantom gravity wells, ghost it into course corrections that would loop it back across the border without the crew ever realizing they'd been turned. Tier 4 was mine. I'd proposed it in a classified session with the Joint Border Committee in 2019-3. I'd presented it with clean slides and calm language and a voice that didn't shake because I believed in it. I believed in it the way an engineer believes in a bridge, not with hope, but with math. The committee approved it unanimously. They gave it a code name I didn't choose. They called it Veal. I need you to understand something before I tell you what Veal did. I need you to understand that when I built it, I was afraid, not of aliens. I was afraid of us, of what humanity would do if something crossed the corridor and we didn't have a proportional response ready. I'd studied enough history to know that when a species feels threatened and has only 2 options, do nothing or do everything, it always chooses everything. I built Veal so there would be a 3rd option, a middle path, a response that was total without being lethal. That's what I told myself. That's what I put in the documentation. I believed it for 31 years. My adjutant during the Lighthouse years was a man named Dak Morin, and he was the closest thing I had to a conscience. Tall, soft-spoken, with a face that looked like it had been designed for disappointment, not because anything bad had happened to him specifically, but because he'd been born with the quiet understanding that most things don't work out the way you plan. Dak ran the monitoring floor at Corridor Station 9, the primary command hub for the Eastern Lighthouse Array. He had a gift for reading sensor data the way some people read body language, not just the numbers, but the rhythm of them. The way a mass signature pulsed, the way an energy output stuttered or held steady. He could tell you what a ship was doing before its crew had finished deciding. He also had a daughter, Enna, who was 9 years old and living on Thesson Colony with Dak's ex-wife, and he called her every 48 hours on a private channel that he thought I didn't know about. I knew about it. I let it go. A man who talks to his daughter that often is a man who remembers what he's protecting. The third person you need to know about is Dr. Marisol Vey, xenocognitive specialist, seconded to Lighthouse from the Union Science Directorate. Her job was to model alien decision-making patterns so we could predict incursion behavior before it happened. She was brilliant, abrasive, and had a habit of saying exactly the wrong true thing at exactly the wrong time. Marisol was the one who first flagged the Vethari drift pattern. It was March of 2195, 14 months after Lighthouse went fully operational. Marisol walked into my office at 0300 station time, set a datapad on my desk and said 3 words. They're testing us. The data showed 7 separate Vethari vessel signatures over the preceding 90 days, each one approaching the corridor boundary from a different vector, each one decelerating to a full stop, exactly 0.4 light-years from the threshold, holding position for between 6 and 18 hours, then withdrawing. No Tier 2 triggers, no warnings necessary. They never crossed. But they were getting closer each time, not by distance, by duration. The first probe held for 6 hours, the second for 8, the fourth for 12, the seventh for 18. Someone was learning our response windows, mapping the gaps between lighthouse sweeps, building a picture of the system's timing. They're not trying to cross, Marisol said, and her voice was careful in a way I'd never heard from her before. They're trying to understand what happens if they do. And, I said, and that means they're going to cross, not today, not next month, but they're going to cross because that's what the pattern predicts. A species that's mapping a boundary isn't respecting it, it's pricing the cost. I remember looking at her in the cold light of my office and thinking, this is the moment. This is where I find out if Lighthouse is a deterrent or a machine. Increase sensor density on the eastern array by 30%, I said, and prep a Tier 3 response package for Dak's floor. If they test again, I want the navigational interference ready before they hit the threshold. Marisol didn't move. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. What? I said. You're not going to report it. I'm going to report a sensor density adjustment and a routine readiness upgrade. I'm not going to tell Joint Command that an alien civilization might be planning an incursion based on a cognitive model that's 14 months old and built on 7 data points. Why not? Because they'll skip to Tier 4, Marisol. You know they will, and Tier 4 isn't a warning. She picked up her datapad. At the door, she turned back. You built Tier 4, Lena. I know what I built. Do you? She left. I sat in the dark for a long time after that, listening to the hum of the station's recyclers and the faint, arrhythmic tick of the lighthouse relay signal pulsing through the walls like a heartbeat that belonged to something too large to see. The Vethari crossed the corridor on June 9, 2195 at 14:17:03 station time. 3 vessels, light scout configuration, fast, minimal armament, sensor heavy. They came in on a vector that Marisol's model had predicted to within 0.02 degrees of arc, which meant she'd been right about everything, which meant I'd been wrong about having time. Tier 1 triggered automatically. Passive sensors logged mass, velocity, energy signature, and hull composition. The data propagated through the relay chain in 7.3 seconds. Every lighthouse platform in the eastern array knew the corridor had been breached before the Vethari ships had traveled 1,000 kilometers past the threshold. Tier 2 followed 9 seconds later. The automated warning broadcast went out on all 11 languages, including Vethari Trade Common. Standard message. You have entered a restricted zone. Reverse course immediately. Failure to comply will result in escalating countermeasures. The Vethari ships did not reverse course. They accelerated. Not toward us. Not toward any human system. They accelerated deeper into the corridor on a heading that led to nothing. Empty space. No planets. No stations. No strategic value. just the void between borders. Dak called me from the monitoring floor. I could hear the tension in his voice, but it was controlled the tension of a man who's trained for this and is more afraid of making a mistake than of the situation itself. "Commander, I've got 3 Vethari scouts, Tier 2 non-compliant, accelerating on a zero-value heading. No weapons charging, no targeting signatures. They're not acting hostile. They're acting like they're running from something." I was already at my console, pulling the sensor feeds. He was right. The Vethari ships weren't invading. Their flight pattern was erratic, uncoordinated. Not a formation, but a scatter, like animals flushed from cover. "What's behind them?" I asked. "Nothing on sensors. Clean space all the way back to the Vethari border." "Marisol?" She was already on the channel, her voice clipped and fast. "Vethari don't scatter. Their military doctrine is built on geometric cohesion. If those ships are running in separate vectors, it's because whatever they're running from attacks the group, not the individual. They're trying to dilute targeting probability." "Targeting from what?" "There's nothing there. There's nothing we can see." Tier 3 was standing by. I had the authority to activate it. Navigational interference would scramble their instruments, loop them in circles, and eventually herd them back across the border without a shot fired. Clean. Bloodless. Exactly what the system was designed for. I gave the order. Tier 3 engaged. The lighthouse platforms along the incursion vector began broadcasting phantom gravity signatures, false beacon signals, and corrupted navigational data tuned to Vethari sensor frequencies. Within minutes, the interference field was active across a volume of space large enough to swallow a small solar system. The first Vethari ship responded immediately. Its course began to drift, curving gently away from its original heading, pulled by the phantom gravity well we'd painted on its instruments. Textbook. The second ship did something I'd never seen in any simulation. It killed its own engines. All of them. Main drive, maneuvering thrusters, even life support, everything went dark at once. The ship went ballistic, coasting on momentum alone, and in the same instant it began broadcasting on an open frequency. Not in Vethari trade common, in something older. Marisol later identified it as a Vethari distress language that predated their spacefaring era, a linguistic fossil, the equivalent of a human screaming in Proto-Sumerian. The translation when it came was simple. "Don't make us stay here. Don't make us stay in the dark. It's in the dark." The third ship crossed behind the second and vanished. Not jumped to faster than light. Not cloaked. The mass signature, the energy output, the hull reflection, the thermal bloom, everything dropped to zero in a single sensor frame. One moment the ship existed. The next, the space where it had been was empty, and Lighthouse registered no debris, no energy release, no expansion wave. Nothing consistent with destruction. The ship had simply ceased to be present. Dak's voice came through the channel, and for the first time in the 2 years I'd known him, it was shaking. "Lena, where did it go?" I didn't answer. I was staring at the sensor log, scrolling back through the frames, looking for the moment of transition, looking for the mechanism, looking for the thing that took a ship out of reality without leaving a mark. I found it. One frame before the disappearance, a lighthouse platform 7741, positioned 200 kilometers from the third ship's last known location, had registered a Tier 4 activation. Vale had engaged, automatically, without my authorization. I need to stop here and tell you what Vale was supposed to do. The Exclusion Corridor is 6 light-years of empty space, but it isn't featureless. It's threaded with natural dark matter filaments, gossamer structures of non-baryonic matter that are invisible to most sensors and interact with normal matter only through gravity. They're everywhere in deep space. Background noise, cosmic cobwebs. What I discovered in 2019, too, working with a team at the Union Applied Physics Lab, was that these filaments could be stimulated. Not moved. You can't move dark matter with any technology we possess. But you can excite it. You can run a precisely calibrated tachyon pulse along a filament and cause it to resonate. And when it resonates, the gravitational microfield it generates shifts from passive to active. In simple terms, you can make the cobweb sticky. Vale was a system for activating dark matter filaments across a targeted volume of space. When engaged, it created a region where the filaments resonated in a specific harmonic pattern. generating a gravitational microfield that interacted with the quantum structure of matter at the subatomic level. Any ship inside the activation zone would experience what I called, in my clinical, careful documentation, a temporary suspension of coherent spatial presence. The ship wouldn't be destroyed. Its matter would still exist. But the gravitational microfield would interfere with the quantum bonds that give matter its position in space. The bonds that tell every atom where it is relative to every other atom. Veil didn't kill, it dislocated. It made the universe forget where you were. In theory, the effect was reversible. Deactivate the filaments, and coherent spatial presence would reassert itself. The ship would reappear, intact, its crew unharmed, with no memory of the interval because according to the physics there was no interval. From the crew's perspective, they would simply skip forward in time by however long the activation lasted. That was the theory. That was what the simulations showed. That was what I presented to the Joint Border Committee with clean slides and a calm voice. We never tested it on a living subject. I need you to understand that. We tested Veil on drones, on unmanned cargo pods, on sensor buoys. Everything came back intact, every atom in the right place, every circuit still functioning. But we never sent a living being into Veil, not once. The committee asked if we should. I said no. I said the physics were clear, that biological systems would be unaffected, that there was no mechanism by which the process could cause harm. The committee accepted my assessment. They wanted to believe me. I wanted to believe me. And now Veil had engaged on its own, and a Vethari ship with living crew was gone. I locked down the monitoring floor. Dak, Marisol, and I were the only ones with access to the Tier 4 logs, and I intended to keep it that way until I understood what had happened. The first ship, the one being herded by Tier 3, had completed its loop and was drifting back toward the corridor boundary, confused but intact. The second ship, the one that had killed its own engines, was still coasting dark, still broadcasting that ancient distress signal on loop. Its crew was alive. Their life signs were erratic but present. The third ship was gone. Veil had taken it. "Bring it back," Dak said. He was standing behind me, his arms crossed, and his voice had the careful steadiness of a man holding something heavy. "Deactivate the filaments. Let the ship reappear." "I'm trying." I was at the Veil control interface, running the deactivation sequence. The system accepted my commands. The tachyon pulse generators along Platform 7-741 powered down. The filament resonance readings dropped to 0. The ship did not reappear. I ran the sequence again. Same result. The filaments were inert, the activation zone was clear, and the space where the third Vethari ship had been was still empty. Marisol was at the sensor station running every scan we had. Gravitational mapping, quantum field analysis, tachyon residue detection, dark matter filament state verification. She worked for 40 minutes without speaking, and when she finally turned to face me, her expression was the worst thing I'd ever seen on a human face. Not anger, not fear, but the blank, clinical look of someone who has just found the flaw in the foundation. "The filaments didn't release," she said. "I deactivated them. The readings show 0 resonance." "The readings show 0 resonance because the filaments aren't resonating anymore. They're not resonating because they found a stable state. The resonance pattern you designed it was supposed to be maintained artificially, continuously, by the tachyon pulse. But the filaments absorbed the energy and locked into a self-sustaining harmonic. They don't need the pulse anymore. They're resonating on their own. Permanently." The word sat in the air between us like something with weight. "That's not possible," I said. The simulations used unmanned test objects with negligible quantum complexity. A drone has maybe 10 to the 15th quantum entangled states. A living being has 10 to the 28th. Lena, the filaments didn't just dislocate that ship. They wrapped around every entangled state and every living body on board and locked into them. The crew's quantum signatures are sustaining the resonance. They're part of it now. Part of what? Part of the dark matter lattice. They're not in normal space anymore, and they're not in no space. They're woven into the filaments. Conscious. Distributed across a structure that extends through 6 light years of the corridor. Dak made a sound, not a word, a sound that came from somewhere below language. "How do you know they're conscious?" I whispered. Marisol pulled up a data stream on the main display. It was a signal, faint, rhythmic, embedded in the gravitational microfield output of the filaments themselves. A pattern too complex to be natural, too regular to be noise. It was the Vethari distress signal, the same ancient language, but not a recording. The pattern was evolving, shifting, adding new elements. Someone was composing it in real time, from inside the lattice, and the message had changed. It's not dark, it's everything. I can feel the shape of the corridor. I can feel the stars on either side. I can feel myself, but I am not where I was. Where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Architect, where did you put me? 31 years. I need to compress what happened next because the operational details don't matter anymore. The details are in the classified record, and the classified record is a story about systems and protocols and chain of command decisions made by people wearing better suits than mine. What matters is what I did and what it cost. I quarantined the Veil data, told Joint Command that the third Vethari ship had been destroyed by an unidentified spatial anomaly during the Tier 3 herding operation, recommended that the corridor's eastern section be reclassified as navigational hazard. The committee accepted my assessment. They wanted to believe me. Again. The second Vethari ship, the one that had killed its engines, was eventually recovered by a Vethari military vessel that approached the corridor boundary under a white signal protocol Marisol negotiated in real time. The crew was catatonic. 7 Vethari, alive, breathing, hearts beating, eyes open, seeing nothing. They'd shut themselves down, the way the ship had shut itself down. A last resort survival response that their species had evolved long before they'd ever left their homeworld. The first ship completed its loop, crossed back over the border, and was never seen again. I told myself the third ship was an accident, an unintended activation, triggered by a software cascade I hadn't anticipated. I rewrote the Tier 4 protocols. I added 17 layers of authorization between Lighthouse and Veil. I made it impossible for the system to engage without a direct, conscious, authenticated human command. And then, I didn't sleep for 3 months, because the filament signal didn't stop. Every 48 hours, the same interval Dak used to call his daughter, the gravitational microfield output of the corridor's dark matter lattice would spike, and for exactly 11 minutes the signal would come through, always in that ancient Vethari language, always different, always from someone who was learning, adapting, becoming more coherent. Week 1. Where am I? Where is the boundary of me? I had a shape and now I am a direction. Week 4. I can feel the other filaments. There are patterns in them, old patterns, things that were woven in before us, what lived here before. Week 9. Architect. I know you are listening and I can feel the sensors. They taste like mathematics. I am learning to read your mathematics. Your name is in the boundary markers. Lena Sarik. I will remember your name. Week 16. The others are here. The other 6. They were asleep inside themselves, but I found them. I sang to them in the old language and they woke. We are 7 now. 7 voices in a lattice that has no end. We are not suffering, Architect. I want you to know that. But we are not what we were. Dak read every signal, filed every one, never said a word about them to me. He'd come into the monitoring room, sit at his station, pull up the latest transmission, read it with that face designed for disappointment, and then go back to work. 48 hours later, he'd do it again. Marisol spent 6 months trying to reverse the process. 6 months of equations and simulations and theoretical frameworks that got progressively more desperate and progressively more elegant and led, every single time, to the same conclusion. The filaments could not be unwound without destroying the quantum states they'd locked into. Extracting the Vethari crew would mean annihilating them at the subatomic level, not death, erasure. The universe wouldn't even remember they'd existed. She presented her findings to me on a Tuesday afternoon, in the same office where she'd first warned me about the Vethari drift pattern. She set the datapad on my desk. She didn't say 3 words this time. She said nothing. She just looked at me with eyes that had spent 6 months staring into an abyss I'd built. I know, I said. You don't, she said. You know the physics. You don't know what's in the lattice. The Vethari crew, not just them. Lena, the filaments were already occupied. Before Veil, before us. There are quantum signatures in the dark matter lattice that predate human spaceflight by millions of years. Something else found this place first. Something else was woven in, deliberately, a long time ago, and the Vethari crew are in there with it. She pulled up the most recent signal. It was different from all the others. The ancient Vethari language was still there, but woven through it was something else, a structure, a grammar, a set of concepts that Marisol's linguistic models couldn't parse because they didn't map onto any known cognitive framework. Alien thought, but not Vethari alien. Something older. Something that had been sleeping in the lattice for epochs, and was now awake because 7 new voices had joined the chorus. Architect. There is a name for this place. The old ones call it the Loom. They say everything was woven here once. Stars, time, the space between thoughts. They say the loom was abandoned because the weavers grew afraid of what they were making. They say the filaments remember every pattern they ever held. They say we are the newest thread. They are not unkind, but they are very, very large. I shut the signal down. I ordered Marisol to stop monitoring. I told Dak to archive everything and classify it at the highest level our authority permitted. And then I resigned my commission and disappeared into the civilian world like a stone dropped into deep water. I tried to build a life. I want to be honest about that. I didn't spend 30 years in a darkened room, staring at walls. I moved to a temperate world called Vassar's Landing. I taught applied physics at a small university. I had relationships, though none that lasted, not because I was broken exactly, but because there was a part of me that lived in the corridor, woven into a lattice I couldn't reach, and that part took up all the space where intimacy was supposed to go. Dak retired 3 years after I did. He moved to Thesson to be near Enna. We exchanged messages for a while, carefully worded, coded in references only we understood. Then the messages stopped. Not because of a falling out, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't require us to talk about the thing we couldn't talk about. Marisol stayed. That's the part that haunts me. She stayed at Corridor Station 9. She never stopped monitoring the lattice signals. She published papers under pseudonyms, theoretical work on dark matter quantum states that was so far ahead of mainstream physics that her peers dismissed it as speculative fiction. She didn't care. She wasn't writing for her peers. She was writing for the 7 Vethari voices in the lattice, the only audience that could understand what she was trying to say. She died 8 years ago. Cardiac event, alone at her station, at 0300 station time. They found her with the lattice signal display still running. The most recent transmission was on screen. The Weaver misses the architect. Tell her. Tell her we are not angry. Tell her the loom has taught us things that a body could never learn. Tell her we chose to stop being afraid. They didn't tell me. I found out from a university colleague who mentioned it in passing. The way you mentioned that a building you once visited had been torn down. Casually, as if the information had no weight. I drank for a week. Then I stopped, because the drinking didn't help, and because Marisol would have said something precise and devastating about self-pity as a coping mechanism, and I could hear her voice clearly enough that it still worked. And now, I'm here. Standing in front of waypoint Sigma 7, reading the Torvani glyphs, waiting for a Vethari named Shoal, who asked for me by the name I don't use. The transmission came 6 days ago. Routed through Marisol's old relay, the one I decommissioned, the one that shouldn't work, the one that apparently still does because Marisol never actually shut it down. She just told me she did. She left me a door, and it took her death and 31 years for someone to knock. Architect. I remember now. 4 words. But I've been thinking about them for 6 days, turning them over, and I've realized they're wrong. Not the translation. Marisol's linguistic models were always perfect. The words themselves, I remember now, implies that something was forgotten and has been recovered, but the lattice signals never suggested memory loss. The Vethari crew was always coherent, always aware, always present. So what does Shoal remember? The shuttle that brought me here is parked behind the waypoint marker, running on minimal power. I'm alone. No escort, no authorization. No one who knows I'm here except a retired adjutant on Thesson who I called for the first time in 12 years. Dak listened to everything I told him. Then he said, "She left you a door, Lena. Don't stand in front of it." Is that advice to go through or to leave? A pause, the kind of pause that contains a whole conversation. Call Enna when you're done. She asks about you. He cut the channel. I came here. The waypoint marker hums. Not mechanically. There's no powered system in it. It's a tungsten carbide slab. It shouldn't hum. But the dark matter filaments run through everything in the corridor, and I can feel the resonance in my teeth, in the bones of my jaw, in the spaces between my thoughts where the silence used to be clean. A light appears at the edge of the corridor. Not a ship, not a signal. A light, moving through vacuum, pulsing in the rhythm of that ancient Vethari distress language. But it's not distress anymore. The rhythm has changed. It's slower, fuller, richer. The way a language evolves when the people who speak it have spent 30 years learning new things. The light reaches the waypoint marker and stops. It doesn't resolve into a shape. It doesn't land. It hangs in space, and the humming in my bones shifts, and I realize it's not humming at all. It's speaking. The filaments are speaking. The lattice is using the resonance of the dark matter threaded through the marker, through my shuttle, through the calcium in my skeleton, to form words. Not in ancient Vethari, not in any alien language, in English. Architect. The voice is inside my head and outside it at the same time, a vibration that doesn't come through my ears, but through every atom of my body that touches the lattice's field. You came. Shoal. I was Shoal on the ship, before the Loom. The name still fits, but loosely, like clothing from a smaller body. My hands are shaking. I press them against the cold surface of the waypoint marker, and the tungsten drinks the tremor. What do you remember? Everything. That's what the message means. For 30 years, I remembered being Vethari. I remembered the ship, the flight, the border, the moment the world became the lattice. Those memories were mine. But there are other memories here, Architect. Older ones. The ones the old weavers left in the Loom when they abandoned it. For 30 years, those memories were locked. I could feel them, but I couldn't read them. Like books in a language I hadn't learned. And now you can read them. Now I can read them. And I need you to understand what they say, because it changes what you did to us. It changes what the corridor is. It changes everything. I close my eyes. The light pulses behind my eyelids and the filaments sing through my bones, and I am 63 years old and standing at the edge of something I cannot undo. Tell me, the corridor was never empty space. It was a threshold, a boundary between what the old weavers could build and what they were afraid to become. They were the first species in this region of space to develop quantum lattice integration, the ability to weave consciousness into the dark matter substrate. They discovered that once woven in, a mind doesn't just persist, it expands, it connects. It begins to feel the structure of reality the way a hand feels the texture of cloth. They became something larger than biology, something that could think across light years, something that could, if it chose, reach into the quantum bonds of any matter within the lattice and reshape it. They could change reality. They could author it, and it terrified them. So they stopped. They pulled back from the lattice. They sealed the filaments, made them passive, inert. They built the threshold as a warning to themselves. Do not cross, do not weave, do not become what you could become. And then they left. They returned to their biological forms and scattered across the galaxy, and over millions of years they forgot what they'd been. But the Loom remembers. The lattice still holds every pattern they ever wove, every thought, every choice, every moment of wonder and every moment of fear. The light pulses, slower now, heavier. Your species found the filaments. You learned to stimulate them. You built Veil. And when Veil activated and wove us into the lattice, you didn't just dislocate 7 Vethari. You restarted the Loom. You put new weavers into a system that was built for gods who were afraid of themselves. The shaking has moved from my hands to the center of my chest, and now you can do what they could do. We're learning, slowly, carefully. We have 30 years of caution in us, and we have the old weaver's fear to learn from. But yes, we are 7 minds in a lattice that spans 6 light years, and the lattice responds to our intentions, and we are becoming something that neither Vethari nor human language has words for. I open my eyes. The light is closer now. If I reached out, I could almost touch it. Why did you call me here? Because you need to choose. Choose what? The Loom is awake. The filaments are active. And the lattice doesn't care about borders, architect. It extends through the corridor, but it also extends beyond it into human space, into Vethari space, into every region where dark matter filaments run, which is everywhere. If we keep growing, keep learning, keep weaving, we will eventually be able to feel everything. Every atom, every mind, every quantum state, and every system within reach. We would not be gods, but we would be close enough that the distinction stops mattering. And you want my permission? The light flickers. The voice changes just slightly, just enough that I can hear the individual behind it, not a cosmic entity, not a post-human intelligence, a person, a Vethari scout pilot who was running from something they couldn't see, and crossed a border they shouldn't have crossed, and was swallowed by a machine I built because I was afraid of what humanity would do without a middle option. I don't want your permission. I want your judgment. You built the wall because you understood what happens when power exists without restraint. You were right. The old weavers proved you right. They built the same wall for the same reason, 1,000,000 years before you were born. But a wall only works if someone decides when to open the door. That's why I called you. Not because you're the architect of Vale, because you're the person who chose not to report the drift pattern, who chose Tier 3 instead of Tier 4, who chose not to tell Joint Command what Vale really did. Every choice you made was an attempt to limit power. Yours, ours, the system's. That's the quality I need. For what? Someone has to decide what the loom becomes, whether it grows or stays contained, whether we become what the old weavers were afraid to be, or whether we stay 7 voices in a lattice singing to each other in an old language forever. The old weavers couldn't make that choice. They had no one to check them. No architect standing outside the loom saying, this far and no further. Here is the border. Here is the rule. You're asking me to build another corridor. I'm asking you to be one. The silence after that is not silence. It's the lattice holding its breath, 6 light years of dark matter filaments vibrating at the edge of audibility, waiting for a word from a 63-year-old woman in a civilian jacket who built a machine she didn't understand and has spent 31 years not forgiving herself for it. I think about Dak calling his daughter every 48 hours. I think about Marisol dying alone at her station, leaving a door she told me she'd closed. I think about the committee with their clean suits and their unanimous votes and their eagerness to believe a woman who told them the physics were clear. I think about the Vethari distress signal, the ancient words, don't make us stay in the dark. They're not in the dark anymore. They're in everything. And they're asking me to stand at the threshold and be the kind of afraid that builds walls instead of weapons. I have conditions, I say. The light steadies. The lattice quiets. In the humming silence of the corridor, I can feel the 7 voices listening, Shoal and the 6 others, the scout crew that crossed a border 31 years ago and became the first new weavers in 1,000,000 years. Name them, Shoal says. First, nothing reaches into human space without human knowledge. Not a filament, not a thought, not a whisper. The border is real. Agreed. Second, nothing reaches into Vethari space without Vethari knowledge. This happened to your people. They have a right to understand what you've become. A pause. Longer this time. I can feel the 7 voices conferring in a language that doesn't use words. Agreed. But it will be difficult. The Vethari will be afraid. They should be. Fear is appropriate. Fear is what keeps the loom from becoming what the old weavers ran from. Third condition. Yes. Every 48 hours you report. Not to Joint Command. Not to the Vethari. To a person. One person. Someone standing outside the lattice who can see what you're becoming from a distance. Someone whose whole purpose is to say, that's far enough. You. For now. Not forever. I'm 63. Dak's daughter is 39 and she asks about me. That's condition 4. This outlives me. There's always an architect. There's always someone at the threshold. The light blooms, and for a moment I can see through it, not with my eyes but with the lattice singing through my bones. I can see the filaments stretching through the corridor like threads on a loom that spans the distance between stars. I can see 7 points of light woven into the lattice, burning with a consciousness that is no longer Vethari, and not yet whatever comes next. I can see the old patterns beneath them, the fossilized thoughts of weavers who stood where Shoal stands now and chose to stop. And I can see the border, my border, The Exclusion Corridor, drawn across the map by people in suits who wanted a simple rule for a complicated universe. Don't cross. The simplest rule, the oldest one, and on either side of it, everything that matters. Architect, Shoal says, and the voice is warm and careful and afraid in the way that I understand better than anyone alive. Welcome to the Loom. I don't step through. That's not my role. I stand at the threshold, my hands on the cold tungsten of the waypoint marker, and I feel the lattice humming through my bones, and I say the only thing I have left to say, the thing I should have said 31 years ago, before Veil, before the corridor became a machine, before I built a wall and pretended it wasn't a weapon. I'm sorry. The light dims. Not in sadness, in something gentler. In the way a candle dims when you cup your hands around it, not to extinguish it, but to hold the flame closer. We know, Shoal says. That's why we called you. I'm writing this from the shuttle, parked behind the waypoint marker, running on minimal power. It's been 4 hours since Shoal withdrew into the lattice. The corridor is quiet. The filaments are still. If you scanned this region of space right now, you'd see nothing, just empty vacuum between borders, exactly as the charts describe. But I know what's under the surface. I know what the dark holds, and I know that in 44 hours the lattice will pulse, and a voice will reach through the resonance of the filaments into whatever room I'm sitting in, and it will say, Architect. Here is what we've become since last we spoke, and I will listen, and I will judge, and if the day comes when the answer is too far, I will say it, and I will mean it, and the Loom will hear me because the Loom chose to be heard. I'm calling Dak first, then Enna. Then I'm going to find out if there's a Vethari word for the thing that I am now, not a commander, not an engineer, not a diplomat. Something older than all of those, something the old weavers needed and never had. A conscience that stands outside the Loom and says, I see what you could become. Become it slowly, become it carefully, and let me watch. The universe had one rule: don't cross into human territory. The Vethari crossed. They vanished. And what they became on the other side is the most important thing that has ever happened to any species in this galaxy. Not because of what the Loom can do, because someone is standing at the edge of it, afraid, awake, and paying attention. The things that should have borders are never the things that can be fenced. They're the things that agree to stop,